The citadel hung in the void, a perfect silver spindle against the velvet dark. Its symmetry was absolute, its silence profound. Within, the air was still and scentless, recycled through filters so efficient they stripped away any hint of individuality. Science director Xylan watched the star charts on the main display, a map of a tame and ordered galaxy. Every civilization within it had passed the great filter, not of technology but of philosophy. They had sacrificed chaos for peace, unpredictability for safety. It was the only way to survive the cosmos. A soft chime broke the silence, a sound so calibrated it could not cause alarm. A junior technician spoke, its voice a neutral monotone. Reality deviancy detected. Source: Sol System, third planet. Designation: Earth. Xylan's long fingers danced across the interface. The data stream was a torrent of insanity. Unregulated energy signatures flared and died in milliseconds. Matter was being transmuted on a planetary scale, not in centralized facilities, but in millions of scattered, illogical locations. Analysis? He asked, his own voice cool. Pattern indicates recursive experimentation with base reality. Probability of cascading dimensional failure, 8% and rising. A weapon. It had to be a weapon. No species would be so reckless. Initiate Category 7 Quarantine Protocol. Isolate the system. Deeper scans resolved. The images made Xylan's carapace itch. A human, alone in a small plot of land, was manually inserting seeds into the soil. Then it poured hydrocarbon-infused water onto them. It was actively encouraging uncontrolled biological mutations. In another location, a human took a hardened steel tool and struck a piece of shaped cellulose, over and over, shearing it along a specific grain. It was a ritualized, precise destruction of matter. The experiments are not centralized, the technician reported, confusion seeping into its tone. They are being conducted by approximately 4 billion individual units. The planetary government shows no oversight. Xylan felt a cold dread. It wasn't a weapon. It was worse. It was a plague of irrationality, a planet lost to madness. The deviancy was the culture itself. He watched a final clip. A human was applying extreme heat to a silicate slurry, transforming it into a vitrified, semi-translucent solid with no apparent function. The human then placed the object on a shelf and smiled. The smile was the most terrifying part. It was a look of profound satisfaction derived from sheer, pointless danger. The quarantine was necessary, but it was not enough. They needed to understand this pathology before it could somehow spread. They needed an observer, one of their best, to go into the heart of the madness and assess the true threat. He opened a channel. Prepare a stealth probe. Summon Dr. Kalen. He is to embark on a deep-cover taxonomic mission. His objective: to study the human deviancy and determine if their world can be salvaged, or if it must be erased. The air on Earth was a thick soup of smells. Dr. Kalen's environmental suit filtered out the particulates, the pollen, the millions of microorganisms, but it could not filter out the overwhelming sense of chaos. His ship was hidden in a gravitational fold high above the American Midwest, and he himself was camouflaged within the visual spectrum, a ghost observing a world of frenetic life. His first subject was in a structure filled with heat and violent noise. A human, covered in protective leather, was hammering a piece of incandescent metal on a heavy anvil. Sparks flew like miniature supernovae. Kalen's scanners registered the metal's crystalline structure being forcibly realigned with every blow. The human's vital signs showed elevated stress, increased adrenaline. This was clearly a controlled outburst of rage, a ritualized venting of destructive impulses. He documented it as aggressive metallurgical catharsis. Next was a quieter but equally illogical scene. A human sat before a stretched fabric substrate, applying colored pigments from a small tool. It was creating a non-functional, two-dimensional representation of a local flora specimen. The scanner could find no data storage function, no communicative purpose. It was redundant. The subject already had the original plant in a container nearby. This was inefficient visual replication. Then came the sound. It was in a park. A human was drawing a horsehair bow across taut metal strings stretched over a wooden box. The vibrations produced a series of complex, modulating sound waves. Kalen's biomonitor flagged the frequencies as emotive carriers. This was targeted emotive sonic projection. A weapon. He braced for its effect on the other humans nearby. None fled. Instead they stopped. They sat. Their vital signs synchronized, their stress levels dropped, and their faces took on a placid, receptive quality. They were willingly subjecting themselves to the transmission. Worse, Kalen felt a strange fluctuation in his own cognitive processes. A memory long suppressed of the crystalline gardens on his homeworld surfaced with unexpected clarity. He dismissed it as a pathogen breaching his filters. He moved on, his unease growing. He observed an elderly female human manipulating two slender rods to loop a continuous filament into a complex, interlocking pattern. Textile weaving, his database supplied. But his deep-level neural scan of the woman revealed something astonishing. Her brain was a storm of activity, firing across hemispheres in a symphony of mathematical calculation, spatial reasoning, and fine motor control, all while maintaining a calm, meditative state. This wasn't mindless repetition. It was an immensely complex neurological dance for the most trivial of ends, creating a non-thermoregulatory garment. The purpose was the process itself. The thought was so alien it felt like a physical shock. His mission was to categorize the danger, to file a report that would likely condemn this world. But the data was not fitting into neat boxes of threat assessment. He saw rage in the smith but also focus. He saw redundancy in the painter but also beauty. He saw a weapon in the musician but also peace. The contradiction was maddening. He needed to understand. Protocol demanded he remain hidden. But taxonomy required direct interaction. The fate of a world balanced on his comprehension. He saw a human female working alone with wet clay on a spinning wheel, her hands shaping the slurry with a gentle, confident pressure. It was less violent than the smith, less abstract than the painter. It seemed approachable. Making a decision that would forever divide his life into before and after, Kalen deactivated his camouflage and walked into the open. The potter, Elara, didn't scream. She started, her hands pausing on the spinning clay, causing the form to wobble. She looked at the being that had materialized beside her studio shed. It was tall, insectoid, and clad in a suit of shimmering gray material. Its large, compound eyes reflected the dappled afternoon light. "You are not reacting with fear," Kalen stated, his voice a synthesized approximation from a speaker on his chest. "My statistical models predicted an 87% chance of panic." Elara wiped her hands on a rag, leaving smears of terracotta. "Well, your models need an update. We've been hoping you'd show up eventually. Just didn't think you'd look like a praying mantis in a spacesuit." She gestured to the wobbly lump on her wheel. "You made me ruin my vase." Kalen processed this. Her primary concern was the failed creation, not his presence. "I am Dr. Kalen. I am here to study your activities. The galactic consensus has classified them as reality deviancies. This vase is an unauthorized restructuring of matter." Elara burst out laughing. It was a warm, unfettered sound that seemed to push back the edges of Kalen's anxiety. "A deviancy? For pottery? Honey, this is a hobby." She said the word as if it explained everything. When he remained silent, she continued. "A hobby. Something you do for fun. For the challenge. To make something with your own hands. It doesn't have to be useful." "Fun," Kalen repeated. The concept was in the database, but filed under inefficient neurological reward triggers. Challenge without purpose. This is the core of the deviancy. "No, it's the core of being alive," she said softly. "Here. Let me show you." She scooped up a new ball of clay and slapped it onto the wheel. "Sit." It was an order. Kalen, his protocols crumbling, found himself sitting on a dusty stool. Elara guided his suited hands onto the cool, wet earth. "Now, center it. The wheel spins and you have to fight the chaos. You have to find the still point in the storm." His first attempt was a disaster. The clay slithered between his fingers like a live thing, spraying water and muck across his pristine suit. He applied too much pressure and the form collapsed. He applied too little and it wobbled into a useless spiral. It was frustrating. It was infuriating. It was engaging. For the first time since his arrival, he wasn't observing. He was doing. He was failing. And with each failure, Elara would just smile and say, "Again." On the fifth try, something clicked. The wheel hummed, the clay spun, and his hands, for a fleeting second, found harmony with the motion. The clay rose, a crude, lopsided cylinder, but it was centered. It was his. A strange sensation bloomed in his chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with his suit's thermal regulator. It was the satisfaction of the attempt. A notification flashed on his internal display. A priority channel from Director Xylan. The message was terse. Initial observation period concluded. Submit final threat assessment in 12 cycles. Quarantine fleet is standing by. Recommend classification. Terminal deviancy. awaiting your confirmation. Kalen looked from the message to his muddy, misshapen lump of clay. He looked at Alara's expectant face. He had the data. He had the proof of the danger, the irrationality, the chaos. But he also had the memory of the centering, the focus, the fun. His report would decide the fate of a world. And for the first time in his logical, ordered life, he had no idea what to write. The clay on his hands had dried to a fine gray dust. Kalen sat in the hidden confines of his ship, the sterile air a stark contrast to the rich, organic smells of Alara's studio. He reviewed his data. He had terabytes of information, scans of blacksmiths, neural readings from knitters, audio analysis of musicians. The Citadel would see only the danger. The uncontrolled energy release, the emotive manipulation, the pointless matter transmutation. They would not see the pattern. He began to write his report, not as an indictment but as a revelation. He documented the neurological benefits, the increased neural plasticity, the enhanced problem-solving capabilities, the profound reduction in stress hormones. He argued that these hobbies were not deviancies but advanced cognitive tools. A species that played with reality was a species uniquely adapted to survive its unpredictability. As he wrote, his own disciplined mind craved the focus he had found at the wheel. He opened a simple design program, one meant for drafting efficient engineering schematics. But instead of a circuit diagram, he began to draw. He started with simple, repetitive patterns, geometric shapes that interlocked and wove together. There was no function, no purpose. It was just a flow of lines and curves, a digital expression of something. He found it calming, centering. He saved the file under a personal encryption, a secret he knew was a violation of 100 core tenets. He was so engrossed he almost missed the alert. A passive scan of local galactic comms traffic had flagged an encrypted burst transmission, destination, Citadel High Command. Source, his own ship's secondary systems. A surveillance drone he didn't know was there. It had monitored him. It had seen his interaction with Alara. It had recorded his failed attempts at pottery. And it had just transmitted evidence of his own pattern deviancy, the digital drawings. The message from Xylan was immediate and cold. Observer Kalen is compromised. Confirmed contagion. The human deviancy is not merely planetary, it is a mimetic pathogen. Quarantine protocol escalated to sterilization. The observer is to be retrieved and contained. The source is to be purged. Sterilization. They weren't just going to isolate Earth. They were going to scorch its surface with focused plasma bursts, wiping the slate clean. And it was his fault. By engaging, by becoming infected, he had proven humanity was too dangerous to exist. He had signed their death warrant. He stumbled out of his ship, the night air cool on his suit. He found Alara in her home, glazing a finished pot. He told her everything, his synthesized voice trembling with a shame he didn't know he could feel. They're coming. Because of me. Alara listened, her face growing pale but her hands steady. She placed the pot down carefully. So they're afraid of what we can do? She asked. Terrified. Then, she said, a fierce light igniting in her eyes, we shouldn't hide it. We should show them. Really show them. A demonstration? Kalen was aghast. That will only confirm their fears. Or it will make them understand, she insisted. You felt it at the wheel. That little spark. We have to show them the spark, Kalen. All of it. We'll give them a show this universe has never seen. She grabbed a datapad, her fingers flying across the screen. We have less than a day. We need to coordinate. Every musician, every welder, every baker, every damn knitter on this planet. We're not going to fight them. We're going to perform for them. It was the most illogical, reckless, and human plan he had ever heard. It was their only chance. The sky above Earth changed. The stars wavered and were blotted out by the immense, silent hulls of the galactic quarantine fleet. They were angular and gray ships of pure function, devoid of art or ornament. They took up geosynchronous positions, their plasma lances glowing with a malevolent green energy as they powered up. On the flagship, Xylan watched the tactical display. The planet was a blue-green marble, teeming with forbidden life. Kalen's final, unsubmitted report was on a secondary screen, its conclusions heretical. The observer had fallen. The contagion was real. The order to fire was a moment away. Then every screen on the bridge, every comms channel, every personal data pad flickered and came alive. There was no declaration of war, no plea for mercy. There was music. A 1,000-piece symphony orchestra, playing a piece of such soaring, tragic beauty that several of the bridge crew instinctively flinched. The data stream was multi-layered. One feed showed a massive collaborative forge where teams of humans were creating a colossal, intricate metal sculpture, sparks flying in a glorious, dangerous fountain. Another showed 1,000 dancers in perfect unison, their bodies moving in a complex, emotive language that bypassed logic and spoke directly to the soul. A third showed a single steady hand painting a hyper-realistic portrait of an old man, every wrinkle a story, every gleam in the eye a universe of feeling. The galactic AI spluttered alerts. Weaponized inefficiency detected. Pattern is non-hostile but cognitively hazardous. Xylan stared, transfixed, at the choir. He saw the faces of the humans, their eyes closed, their mouths open in song. He saw not the chaos of deviancy, but the harmony of shared purpose. He saw joy. He saw sorrow. He saw life in all its messy, glorious, and terrifying depth. He felt something crack inside him, a shell he didn't know he had. It was terrifying. It was beautiful. Then Kalen's face appeared on the main viewer. He was not in his ship. He was in a simple room with Elara standing behind him. There was clay under his fingernails. Director Xylan, Kalen said, his voice calm, devoid of its usual synthetic flatness. You came here to see a danger. You were right. We are dangerous. We are dangerous to your silence. We are dangerous to your stillness. We are a danger to the perfect sterile death you call peace. We play with fire and call it art. We shape metal and call it expression. We do not just live, we create. And that is a force more powerful than any weapon you have. Do not quarantine us. Learn from us. The weapons officer looked at Xylan, his hand hovering over the firing control. Director? The fleet awaits your order. Xylan looked from the screen, from Kalen's defiant face and Elara's calm one, to the live feed of the dancers, their movement a poem of resilience. He saw it now. Not a plague. Potential. A terrifying, glorious potential. He took a breath, the weight of 1,000 generations of galactic law on his shoulders. He made a choice. Stand down all weapons, he commanded, his voice echoing in the silent bridge. Reclassify planet Earth. From terminal deviancy to protected curiosity. Initiate a full long-term observational study. We are not here to judge. We are here to learn. In that moment, the galaxy shifted on its axis. The silence on the flagship was heavier than the void outside. The plasma lances dimmed, their threat neutralized, but the tension remained. Earth was not destroyed, but it was not free. It was a specimen under a microscope, its new status as a protected curiosity, feeling more like a probationary sentence. On the surface, a collective sigh of relief was followed by a wave of uncertainty. The human race had faced extinction and, through sheer stubborn creativity, had earned a stay of execution. But their judges were still in orbit. Kalen was recalled. There was no ceremony, no debrief. A sterile shuttle collected him. His farewell to Elara was brief, a clasp of hands that transcended species. Show them, she whispered. Show them the spark. He was taken not to a welcome committee, but to a Citadel rehabilitation center. His quarters were a perfect cube, white and silent. His therapy involved hours of neural recalibration, designed to purge the irregular patterns caused by his exposure. They showed him images of his own pottery attempts, of his digital drawings, paired with negative stimuli. They were trying to cure him of his curiosity. He endured it. But in the deepest recesses of his mind, in the quiet moments between sessions, he would retreat. He would remember the feel of clay, the sound of Elara's laugh, the focus of the smith. They could scrub his brain, but they could not touch the memories. They were his hobby now. On Earth, a strange détente unfolded. Galactic observers, clad in their pristine suits, walked among humans. Most kept their distance, scanners active, documenting the curiosity. But a few, the younger ones, the ones not yet fully hardened by Citadel dogma, lingered. A technician named Vril, assigned to monitor a group of woodworkers, found himself fascinated by the curl of wood shavings from a plane. One day, as the human craftsman took a break, Vril pointed a trembling digit at a scrap of paper and a charcoal pencil. How? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. The human, an old man named Joe, smiled. He showed Vril how to hold the pencil. How to make a line. A simple, pointless, beautiful line. It was a secret shared, a tiny rebellion. Across the planet it happened again and again. A gardener showed an observer how to pinch a leaf to encourage growth. A cook explained the why behind combining certain spices. The contagion was spreading not as a plague but as a quiet, subversive gift. Director Xylan, meanwhile, had been reassigned. His command was gone, his reputation tarnished. He now worked in the Citadel's historical archives, a place of dust and dead data. He spent his days reviewing the logs of dead civilizations, all of whom had chosen order over chaos, stability over growth. He saw the same pattern everywhere, a slow, inevitable decline into entropy. They had chosen to be perfect and still, and in doing so they had chosen to die. The emptiness inside him yawned wide. One evening a small nondescript package arrived on his desk. It had no return address. Inside, nestled in cushioning, was a lump of earthy brown clay. And a single, handwritten note. "The purpose is the process." Xylan stared at the innocuous material. It was a sample of the deviancy itself. He should report it. Have it incinerated. He reached for the comms unit. His hand stopped. He looked around the silent, sterile archive. He looked at the clay. Slowly, hesitantly, he reached out and picked it up. It was cool. It was soft. It was real. The crack, once a hairline fracture, was now a branching web across the foundation of the citadel. It began in the lower levels, in the maintenance ducts and residential blocks. Whispers moved through the data streams in channels so archaic the oversight AIs ignored them. They spoke of making. Vril, the technician, had become proficient at drawing. His sketches of engine components were crude but possessed a life the official schematics lacked. He shared them with a like-minded friend in hydroponics, who had secretly been cross-pollinating algae strains to create startling new colors. They weren't trying to improve efficiency. They just liked the colors. This was the heart of the heresy. A network formed, a silent society of makers. They exchanged useless creations, woven chords, small carvings, simple melodies tapped out on console keys. The act of creation, once started, was insatiable. It created a hunger they never knew they possessed, a hunger for expression, for individuality. The Galactic Council discovered it during a routine data sanitization sweep. They found Vril's drawings. They didn't see art, they saw corrupted files. They found the colorful algae, they saw biological tampering. They labeled it the psionic plague of non-functionalism and activated purge protocols. Enforcers, clad in intimidating black armor, moved into the lower levels. They confiscated the drawings. They destroyed the algae vats. They arrested Vril and hundreds of others. They expected compliance. They received something entirely new, resistance. The arrest triggered the first riot in Citadel history. But it was a riot unlike any ever conceived. The makers did not have weapons. They did not throw rocks or energy blasts. As the enforcers advanced, the crowd began to sing. It was a hymn Vril had composed, a simple, repeating melody of hope and defiance. Others held up their carvings, their weavings, their paintings, creating a wall of color and form. The enforcers halted, their tactical systems overwhelmed. How does one combat a song? How does one arrest a painting? The standoff was broadcast across the Citadel before the authorities could shut it down. Xylan watched it from his archive, the lump of clay on his desk now bearing the faint impressions of his own fingers. He saw the confusion on the enforcers' faces. He saw the power of the harmless. The system was breaking. It was not designed to handle beauty. He knew then that the Citadel was a corpse, still standing out of momentum. The future, a messy, chaotic and beautiful future, was being born in its bowels. And he had a choice. He could remain in the archives of the dead, or he could join the living. He accessed a secure channel, one he hadn't used since his demotion. He typed a single, treasonous question to the only other person who would understand. "Kalen, are you ready to make a mess?" The reply was instantaneous. "My hands have been idle for too long." Kalen's rehabilitation cell was not a prison in the traditional sense. The door was unlocked. His compliance was expected, not enforced. But the psychological conditioning had been relentless, a constant, gentle pressure to revert to the norm. It had failed. He had used the solitude not to forget, but to practice. With stolen nutrients and discarded packaging, he had created intricate, tiny models of earthly things. A bird, a flower, a human face. The act of creation had been his true therapy, reinforcing the neural pathways the Citadel was trying to erase. When Xylan's message came, he was ready. He simply walked out. The two of them met in a disused data conduit, the air humming with latent energy. Xylan looked older, but his eyes held a fire Kalen had never seen before. "The Council is in emergency session," Xylan said. "They are preparing to authorize lethal force to quell the artistic disturbances." "Then we don't have much time," Kalen replied. "The Central Communications Hub. If we can seize control of the broadcast systems." "We are not seizing control," Xylan corrected him, a faint smile on his features. "We are sharing a lesson." They moved through the service corridors, a former director and a rogue scientist, guided by members of the Maker Network who appeared from shadowed doorways to point the way. They were the silent resistance, their weapons were their art. Reaching the hub was surprisingly easy. Security was focused on the riots in the lower levels. The few technicians inside looked up in shock as Xylan and Kalen entered. "Director? You are relieved of duty," one stammered. "Everyone is relieved of duty today," Xylan said calmly. He went to the main console. His authorization codes, though demoted, still held weight. The system unlocked. On the view screen, they could see the Enforcer squadrons regrouping, preparing to breach the Maker's barricade with sonic disruptors. This time there would be no hesitation. "What are you broadcasting?" Kalen asked. Xylan's fingers flew across the interface. "The antidote." Across the Citadel, on every public screen and private comm, the image of the tense standoff was replaced. It was replaced by a simple high-resolution video from Earth. A human hand, weathered and kind, was teaching a child how to fold a piece of colored paper into a bird. The video had no narration. It just showed the folds, the careful creases, the final, magical moment when a flat square became a creature with wings. Then it shifted. It showed a baker kneading dough. A programmer writing a simple, elegant line of code. A child building a tower of blocks. It was a cascade of creation, a tsunami of pure, undiluted making. The effect was immediate. In the corridor, an enforcer lowered his sonic rifle. He looked at the weaving in front of him, not as a barricade but as a thing someone had made. He remembered as a child tying knots in a length of string. The memory was warm. The lead enforcer barked an order to advance. His squad didn't move. They were all watching the screens. The door to the comms hub hissed open. Black-armored enforcers filled the doorway, weapons raised. They saw Xylan and Kalen at the console. The lead enforcer stepped forward. "You are in violation of Galactic Edict 1. Surrender." Xylan didn't turn around. He picked up the lump of clay from his pocket and placed it on the console. He began to roll it into a coil, just as Alara had shown him in a memory that now felt like a lifetime ago. Kalen picked up a stylus and a scrap of laminate, and began to draw a simple, looping pattern. The enforcers stood, weapons aimed, at a loss. Their programming had no response to this. The leader looked from the two traitors, calmly engaging in their deviancy, to the screen showing the paper bird taking flight. He slowly, carefully lowered his weapon. What is that?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Kalen looked up, his compound eyes reflecting the light of 1,000 new possibilities. "It's a hobby," he said. "Would you like to learn?" The fall of the Galactic Council was not an explosion, it was a sigh. There was no war, no final, epic battle. The old order simply lost its authority, its reason for being. The enforcers laid down their weapons because they could no longer remember what they were fighting for. The bureaucrats abandoned their posts because their regulations no longer applied to a galaxy that had started to sing. The Citadel itself transformed. The silent, gleaming halls were now filled with the vibrant, chaotic noise of life. The scent of recycled air was replaced by the smell of cooking food from 100 worlds, the tang of paint, the rich odor of wet clay. A Vrillian engineer sold handmade kinetic sculptures next to a human blacksmith demonstrating traditional techniques. A cantor philosopher, who had once written treatises on the virtue of stillness, now taught classes on competitive flower arranging. It was messy. It was inefficient. It was glorious. Humanity, the catalyst, found itself in a new role. They were not rulers. They were guides, mentors, and fellow students. They taught the principles that had always underpinned their hobbies: collaboration, the acceptance of failure, the joy of sharing a skill. The galaxy was learning to play. But the universe always tests new forms of order. From the void between galaxies came the Devourer. It was not an empire or a fleet. It was a swarm, a biological mechanical entity that consumed worlds for their raw matter, a force of pure, mindless entropy. It recognized the new galactic culture as the ultimate chaos, a complex, high-energy system, and moved to consume it. The old galactic military, what was left of it, mobilized. They fired their plasma lances, their quantum disintegrators. The Devourer adapted, its biomass shifting to neutralize each attack. It was a logical problem, and the swarm was a perfect logical engine. It was winning. A war council was held, not in a sterile room, but in the great, noisy forum the Citadel had become. The military commanders proposed a futile last stand. Then a human woman, a composer named Anya, stood up. "You're fighting it on its own terms," she said. "You're using logic against a thing that is only logic. It has no art. It has no soul. It cannot comprehend a gift. A plan was formed, not a military strategy but a collective work of art. Every species, every maker, every being who had learned to create, contributed. They linked their minds and their technology through a network designed not for war, but for expression. As the devourer swarm approached the citadel, ready to consume this vibrant new prize, the galaxy did not fire a single shot. Instead, they projected a symphony. It was not just light and sound. It was the combined emotional and creative output of trillions of beings. It was the sorrow of a lost homeworld turned into a minor chord, the joy of a first drawing transformed into a burst of gold, the stubborn hope of a seedling breaking through concrete woven into a relentless, rising rhythm. They gave the devourer their hobbies. The swarm stopped. It could process the energy signatures, but it could not process the content. The patterns were illogical, recursive, and beautiful. The data stream contained no threat, only offering. It was a mirror held up to the swarm, showing it not what it could destroy but what it lacked. The consuming tendrils recoiled. The hive mind, an entity that had known only hunger, experienced a new sensation, awe, and then change. At the swarm's core, a single new structure began to form, not of consumed matter but of synthesized energy. It was clumsy, asymmetrical, and beautiful. It was the swarm's first faltering attempt to make something. It had received the gift, and in return, it had started its first hobby. The galaxy was safe. Not because it had won a war but because it had shared a song. The man who had once been Dr. Kalin walked through the Hall of 1,000 Suns, now the primary campus of the Galactic Institute of Arts. The air was thick with the scent of ozone from plasma brushes and the earthy smell of clay. A class of young jacks, their reptilian faces scrunched in concentration, were learning to throw pots on human-style wheels. Another group, a mix of species, was being taught the fundamentals of jazz harmony by a woman from New Orleans. He stopped at a large, open studio. Inside, a being of pure energy, a former component of the devourer swarm now known as a luminal, was gently guiding a cantor's tentacles as it tried to blend colors on a digital canvas. The luminal communicated not in words, but in pulses of light that conveyed encouragement. Kalin smiled. This was the new galaxy. A tapestry not of conformity, but of shared individuality. He found his own studio, a space filled with light and the projects of his students. On a central pedestal sat his first successful piece from Earth. The lopsided, crude clay cylinder Ilera had helped him center. It was his most prized possession. Xylan found him there as he often did. The former director now wore simple, comfortable clothes, stained with paint and graphite. He was writing the definitive history of the Great Awakening, but he spent more time teaching beginners how to draw. The luminals are asking about narrative structure, Xylan said, shaking his head in wonder. They want to create stories, with their light sculptures. Tell them about the hero's journey, Kalin replied. It's a good pattern to start with. It was a peaceful, productive existence. They had overseen the transition from a galaxy of fear to one of joyful creation. The concept of HFY was now a historical footnote. Humanity was not special because it was dominant, but because it had been the spark that lit the fuse. They were the elders who had taught a child galaxy how to play. The alert that chimed through the institute was not one of alarm, but of curiosity. Deep space telescopes had detected a new anomaly. Another singularity, another universe perhaps brushing against their own. The old fears might have resurfaced. A unknown. A potential threat. The galactic response was immediate and unanimous. Committees were formed, not of soldiers but of artists, musicians, poets, and engineers. Their mission was not to design weapons but to prepare a welcome. What would they say? What song would they sing? What gift would they make to introduce themselves? Kalin looked out the window at the thriving, messy, beautiful civilization below. He thought of a lump of clay, a spinning wheel, and a human who had refused to be afraid. He picked up a stylus and began to sketch. They had faced the end of everything with a song. They would greet the next beginning with a symphony.